Hey everybody, welcome to the live Q&A with Brian Crabb and Tyson Spiess. Brian, you want to give a little history for the people who didn't catch your scene earlier?
Sure. Yeah. My name is Brian Crabb. I own Viva Collective. I'm a tiny home designer, but a little different is that I just design tiny homes. I don't build them. So I work with private clients. I work with companies. I work with whoever wants a custom designed tiny home. I draw them up and design them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And anything about Viva Collective we should know?
Check out the site. I've got like 35, 40 tiny houses on the site you can check out. You can click on the tiny homes tab, then click on a picture of the house to look at more pictures of the inside, floor plans at the bottom. There's a contact if you want to contact me if you have any questions. Reach out. I'm very excited to be here.
Guys, this guy designed a set of tiny homes that looks like an amplifier.
Yes, yeah, people really like that one. That was
Yeah, I like that one. That's
thank
how I
you.
found you.
I mean,
That's how we found each other.
that's how we found each other. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's
that's
that's the story that they're going to write on our graves.
right. My name is Tyson Spiess, and I was a former owner of Tiny Heirloom. Was early on involved in tinyhouse.com, did tiny luxury for, I can't remember, 3 or 4 years, something like that. And then, now I'm retired. No, I'm not retired. I still work, but I have 3 kids and a beautiful wife who some of you might remember from the show. And now I don't do really any aspect of design, but we had a good run for a while. So I did a lot of the non-aesthetic design for Tiny Heirloom. And, we got a lot into innovation, especially when we were doing our TV show. That was a big part of it, was doing just cool things nobody had ever seen before, expanding furniture, just different types of materials or different ways to install materials, that kind of things, or those kinds of things. And then we took Tiny Heirloom from in-house manufacturing to contract manufacturing, which all that means is that we hired out a lot of the work, which was actually a really cool way to go. It freed us up to do a lot better designs. And then that's when I met Brian Crabb. I think I messaged him on Instagram and saw his worthiness is not the right idea, but way more than that, but saw his capabilities for designing and asked if he'd do some of the designs for Tiny Heirloom. So a lot of the stuff that you see out there, specifically, he did a series for petite retreats for the Key West, and those ones were really cool. And then a lot of our normal tiny homes that weren't on the show, if you see those online, Brian did a lot of those too. So anyway, we're happy to be here and happy to field all of these questions that you guys have about design. So I'm gonna take a scroll back here real quick, and Brian, you just want to take turns picking
Yeah, yeah,
questions?
yeah. Let's let the man, the myth, the legend go first, and then I'll fill out in anything that If there's any softball questions, easy ones, just throw them towards me.
Bunt
But
them over to you.
stuff, let's throw that towards Tyson.
So the first question, the TV show name was Tiny Luxury, and actually you can catch Brian Crabb on TV as well. If you want to say a little plug about that, Brian.
Oh yeah. After I did Tiny House Nation for a few years, designed houses for them, and then I've been designing restaurants for one Gordon Ramsay the last few years, and now I'm doing another thing on Netflix. But that's neither here nor there. But yeah, that's been a lot of fun. I came from television. That's how I got into tiny homes. I'd never done anything residential before. In fact, for any builders, this will be funny. The first time I was on a job site, they asked me for a window schedule. And I said, well, immediately, the schedule should be now. And a schedule is like the list of all the windows. I had no idea what I was doing. So I'd go home and I would spend 3 hours a night Googling, learning how to build. So I know that you can learn from knowing absolutely nothing to being, at least halfway decent.
Yeah, well, you certainly hit that mark and more. So wood versus steel framing. I've had a little bit of experience with steel framing. We used to do that as an upgrade package for the tiny homes that we would build. Um, the way that we did it was a little bit different. We actually, I don't know what you call it, but stick framed one of them with metal at one point, and that was awful experience. So for the rest of them, we got them printed. So there's a company, and I can't remember the name of it, that prints off steel framing, but I'm sure Jason or Zach will put it in the comments down here. But we would actually get our steel framing printed off. So we would set them, yeah, Volstruck, thank you. We would send them a set of plans, and then they would print off our walls and ship them over to us with some instructions on how to put them together. So the installation is actually decently easy with their instructions. It does take a while. I think it's pretty comparable to wood framing, just because that's so conventional and people can get it done actually really quick. But the advantage is that you have a lot stronger system. And so, going down the road, our sales pitch for it was, going down the road, you want something really strong. If it's sitting on a steel chassis, you're going to want something strong above the chassis as well. And then the other thing, one of the downsides of it was just the insulation. So we would do always spray foam with the metal framing. So not only would it help with the shear strength of it, but metal is a good conductor for heat, and so it had a really poor thermal barrier. So the spray foam insulation was really helpful there, but otherwise it's solid. It's expensive, but it's a really good way to go. And the weight was really good. Thank you. It helped a lot with the weight. I think it was 40% lighter than wood.
Right, and that's a thing. Yeah, people don't realize that the steel framing is much lighter. One thing that I will say that you have to think about is on the finishing. Steel is harder to finish, and if you want to hang things and do stuff like that, whereas a lot of builders, they're used to just having wooden studs, right? So they put in a screw, voila. Not necessarily always the case with steel. You just have to think about it a little different. But within tiny homes, I agree, it's much more structurally rigid. Which is always a good thing when you're dragging your house around the country in hurricane force winds.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Julie asks, what is the toughest thing that either of you have experienced with a tiny house? Well, I can say for me, so when we did Tiny House Nation, we would build our houses on a 6-day schedule. And that was the hardest thing that we'd ever done, because usually you're building with builders who aren't, used to working so fast. And the first few days, everyone's excited. But by day 5, everyone hates, they just want to be done. It's miserable. It's raining. It's always raining when you're building. I don't know why. It's always raining. And so just the time crunch, the time schedule. The other thing, too, that we've run into, and you really kick yourself, is when you've designed this whole thing and you go to dress it or stage it, which is when you put the furniture and stuff in, and you realize that you've put together a couch that won't fit through the door or a window or anything else, and then you have to take it apart and build it inside. Those are generally when I think back of the cringiest, hardest stuff, it's always stuff like that.
Yeah. For us, our company built, I think, somewhere around, I don't know, 50 or 60 tiny homes, something like that. And so we hit just about every problem under the sun. But a lot of our stuff was due to location. So the first place that we built out of was a Christmas tree farm inside of an airplane hangar, and we couldn't get the tiny houses out of it. So we'd build it, and I'll never forget the first time we tried to pull one out, and we realized, oh crap, this thing's just not going to come out. We had a 13-foot 6 clearance, and we had built clear up to 14-foot something. And so what we ended up doing was lowering the front of the tiny home and then putting just a ton of our biggest guys in the back of the tiny home. And we also let a bunch of air out of the tires. So it's super non-conventional, but man, we got 7 inches of clearance released on that thing. So, between that and then design frustrations were a pretty big one. We had a pretty big team at one point. And so, getting the designs finished and then translated over to the build team and having it go perfectly again on like Brian's saying, on a TV timeline is really tough, because it's very unforgiving, and the client's coming one way or the other. And I don't think we ever finished a tiny house before our client got there. But outside of that, it's just space stuff on the inside. It got pretty redundant after a while, doing the same kind of floor plans. And so that's why I liked working with Brian and working with other professionals in the design realms, because you have to keep getting creative or you just get really stale. There's only in a 24-foot tiny home, there's only so many places you can put an 8-foot loft. And then what goes under the loft is always, usually a bathroom or, something small like that. And so it just gets really stagnant if you don't try and purposefully switch it up a lot.
Yeah. Right.
The weight, weight was always a huge problem. I mean, everybody wants the world to fit in their tiny home, especially at the beginning of the movement. People were building on utility trailers, which in theory is kind of a cool idea, but it didn't run the gambit as a good idea. So, they started. We had a few trailer manufacturers locally, actually. Being in Oregon, we have a lot of RV manufacturing, so we tapped into that for a little bit. But you have to have a strong chassis. That's what we always tell people. If you're going to spend extra money, do it on the chassis because it's a really important part of it. Because if you get this beautiful house and you kind of skimp on the foundation of it, you're not going to get very far on it. So fifth wheel gooseneck is a really good way to go. If you're going conventional, we typically told people don't go over 24 feet if you're doing it on a conventional flatbed chassis, and then do triple axle if you can do that as well, because they get heavy. People say you don't need a huge pickup to pull these things. It just depends on how you build it. We always recommend it a 1-ton or just for somebody else to tow it for you, because really it's a lot of work sometimes to tow your own tiny house. And if you're like me, you just get far too stressed out for what it's worth.
Agreed. And that's another thing too that I think people need to realize is these are very heavy. They're not aerodynamic at all. And so, you're not just going to throw it onto your F-150 and drag it down the road. If you try to do that, your truck might be able to handle it, but it's going to drag you all over the place. Like, you need professionals, really, especially if you get above 28 feet. I think 24 feet is like where I would suggest, okay, if you want to move this thing every couple weeks, every month, that feels good. But I think if you have a 32-foot trailer and you try to drag it, you're going to do it a couple times and you're going to be like, okay, this is not a luxury RV. It's a house. And I think that's something that, that people kind of forget. They're very heavy. And that's why, because they're built, like a regular home. They're built structurally sound, and they have all the amenities, and they're really big. It's funny to say, but they're actually really big. All right, I got a question from Trish. Ideas on how to heat or cool a kid's Wold for soundproofing privacy loft with a sliding door. So basically, if I understand correctly, Trish, you got a room that's in a loft that's got a wall with a sliding door for the kid, or for you. I'm not sure on if it's the kid's room or you're hiding from the kid. Either way, you've got a room that needs to be heated and cooled. The standard on all of these, the standard is kind of is the mini split. Now, if it's one room, they have these very small window units, and then I think they've got some now too that also heat. But what you've got to remember in a space that small, especially if it's a loft, you're looking at 7 foot by 35 square foot times 4, 140 cubic foot. Like, any kind of heat source is going to heat that thing like an oven so fast, and the same with cooling. So if there's a way to passively cool or heat it, if there's like venting, otherwise, any kind of forced air system is going to be the best. They've got, like I said, some really small window units now that are really cheap. And I think, they've always got a tag that says, oh, this uses $3.72 a year in electricity. They've just come a long way. I don't know if Tyson had
Yeah, we built a tiny house one time where we used an actual air conditioner inside of it. It was a 220. These guys were going to be plugged into the grid pretty much full time. It was a park model. And we ended up ducting that into all of the rooms. But if you're not going quite that luxurious, mini splits are a really good way to go. But kind of like Brian's saying, you place the head unit in the biggest area of your home that's going to give you the best airflow, right? So that's not going to necessarily go through doors or anything like that, especially if you're, wanting privacy. You won't vent the doors and that sort of thing. So they had a really cool European product when we first started. I'm not sure if anybody's come to market with anything in the US, but they had something that was made for their semi trucks over there, where it was a 12-volt unit, but it pushed air through vents, which was actually a really cool kind of thing. Short of that, though, really mini splits are the best way there. When we were working with them, I think it was like 6 1/4 running amps. So it was, something that you could actually run off of solar if you didn't really use a ton of anything else. But we had solar packages that you could run, that you could run your AC off of. But it's just tiny houses are give and take.
Right.
It's not all of the luxuries that you're used to in a home. So finding out, what's most important is key. And in fact, with Tiny Heirloom, that's what we put the focus on was, we had the five must-haves that all of our clients came through and did. And of course, Tiny Heirloom did mostly custom, for the majority of the time that we were there. And so we started out with the five must-haves, just things that, in our theory, it was things that we built the rest of the tiny house around. So if you liked cooking, and you wanted a big kitchen, that's going to kind of dominate your floor space, right? Or at least what the design of your floor space is going to look like. Or if you wanted sleeping accommodations, we had to start with certain things and then backfill the rest of it with whatever's possible with your, 160 square foot footprint. And then I just had one. Interior designers in the movement. I would say it just depends. Again, I've been out of the tiny house game for a little while now, so I'm not sure how many companies are still going custom, but obviously Brian is doing interior design as well as architectural design for tiny homes. But if there's a company that's still doing customized tiny homes or custom tiny homes, then there's probably a need for it. Otherwise, I think a lot of companies have gone to standard models and just things that are, really repeatable. Custom, kind of a
Right.
hard game.
And to note on that too, you got to realize when you've got a house that's so small, the architectural design really becomes part of the interior design anyway, because you're placing. I'm not just designing a whole exterior of the house. You're designing every single piece of furniture that goes in, and the cabinetry. You have to figure out where those cabinets are going to go because you're going around wheel wells. You're already thinking about it so much. It's a very small step to select what that material is. And I know Tyson and myself, we spend a lot of time when you're in this kind of thing and you're cranking stuff out. You're always looking at stuff for inspiration because again, it can get so repetitive because you're stuck on a 24 by 8 foot base and there's only so much you can do. So you're always looking around, looking at architecture outside, looking at Pinterest, looking at Instagram, Reddit, whatever you can find to see somebody doing something new, and then you try to do something cool with that.
Yeah.
Sorry. And then the other thing too is that a lot of clients, especially in the tiny home market, they have a very strong vision of what they think their house should look like. They don't know exactly how it's going to lay out, but they always know what their kitchen they want it to look like. I've never met a single client who can't tell me exactly what they want their kitchen to look like.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing too, to kind of touch base on the heating aspect of it. One thing that we did, I think for a couple of units was radiant heating. So they had this product at the time, and I think there's plenty of upgrades since then, but it's like a net sort of heating. It plugged into 220, but now they have them actually for 12 volts. So if you think of your car, if you have heated seats, that's a type of 12 volt heating, right? Because it's something that just powers off of your car battery. And so you can actually get these 12 volt rolls, and it's not necessarily going to be a very hot thing, but radiant heat, the idea behind it is that it's just a constant sort of low heat, but it fills the room over time. And so that's a really good way if you just want to spot heat certain areas. So you can put those inside of a loft or in the main floor and it'll rise up to the loft. But, imagine if you had your main heating unit in sort of the main portion of the tiny house, and then you have the rooms behind doors or something like that. You can always supplement some of that heat through radiant.
And again, to jump off that, so I did one for a family, and they moved to Montana to Big Sky. And in their home, we did radiant heating on the floor. We also had one of those precious, tiny little wood burning stoves. I can't remember what it was called. But in the dead of winter in Big Sky, Montana, which is snow almost year round, they said that they couldn't use their wood burning stove because it would get too hot, but the radiant heating from the floor was enough to heat their home year round. And this has to do with going back is that, most of these tiny homes are spray foam insulated, which means that it is super rigid and there's not a lot of air coming in or out. So it's kind of like a giant ice box. And so you heat it, you cool it, it maintains and holds a lot of heat or a lot of cool. It doesn't breathe as much as a normal house. So, and it's a tiny space. So when you're thinking about heating or cooling it, it's really like think about heating or cooling one room in your regular house, and that's the scale that we're looking at.
Yeah. Brian, we have a question with your name on it. Can I ask it to you?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so Lindsay, sweet Lindsay wants to know, do you have many clients that take your design to a builder or mostly DIY?
Half and half. Um, right now, I'm working with four different clients, and they're all going to builder. Um, it's generally easier that way. You can build your own home, 100%. The only thing I would suggest that you don't do is the electrical and the plumbing. It's 100% worth it to pay someone to do that because the last thing you want is for your house to burn down. But framing, not that crazy. And it's really, you have to know and do your research if you want to build, especially on wheels. You need to strap your house down to your trailer. You need to have hurricane straps. You don't want this thing blowing, away when you're driving. So as long as you do your research and you do your due diligence and you really focus and make sure you're building it correctly, there's no reason you can't. That being said, builders, they usually start young, and by the time you see them, they've been doing it for 15, 20 years. So it's a lot faster. However, it's probably a lot cheaper to build your own. So I don't know if I actually answered your question or not, but both.
And then, I will say too about building your own tiny home, or really just going through a custom builder to do it. There's a lot of sense behind getting a pre-made model from a builder because it's pretty thought through and they've had a lot of trial and error with it. The downside to it, of course, is that somebody else might have the same model you do. So if that's a concern and you do want to go custom, or if you have specific needs that those won't meet, I can't emphasize enough that spending time on the design is time well spent, right? There's so many people who just say, hey, we got to have this thing in a month, finish the tiny home, and wish that we had this, or wish that there was storage for that, or wish I would have thought about this, or whatever it is. So, designing your own tiny house is great if you know the ins and outs, watched all the shows, got all the tips, all that stuff. But at the very least, I'd say consult with somebody who's been designing for a while, even if it's your builder, or if you know a builder that does custom or really good work. Most time they're more than happy to, help answer questions or whatever it is. But the design is pretty key, right? Because if you have a lot of shoes or if you have a lot of clothes or pots and pans or whatever it is, you want to make sure to accommodate. And that stuff's pretty obvious, right? But there's more non-obvious stuff like where your door is located or what windows are around your kitchen or, how the ceiling pitch is in a certain area or whatever. It's just, stuff that you really want to be confident about, think all the way through and make sure that it's perfectly planned by the time you start breaking ground, so to speak.
Right. Because you don't have space to just say, oh, I've made this mistake. Let me expand. Like, that's it. So you either redo it or you run into problems. Another thing that I do, Lindsay, is because I've got kind of a catalog of homes that I've already done all the design work for, it's easy for me to also change up the floor plan. So I'll customize an existing plan. So you don't have to start from the ground up. Say you love I love this model. A lot of people really like the house that I did for Asha that's got the working amp. Most people don't need a working amp in their home. So we would modify that and you still get the same look, but maybe you want to change the floor plan up a little bit. That's also completely, we're capable of doing that as well. So you don't have to start from the ground up to create your dream home. You can create it within an existing design shell, if that makes sense.
There's a question about putting a horizontal Murphy bed under a bar height island. I think that could probably work. I think a twin bed is 3 feet wide. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah. Yes.
3 feet
Yeah.
wide. Bar height, I think there's two different bar heights. One is like a cafe bar, and then the other one is a true bar. And I think it ranges from 40 to 43 inches or something, somewhere around
Yeah.
there.
42 is your stand. Like if you were to say bar
42.
height in your house, you have your counter height, 36, and then your bar jumps up. If you're thinking about on an island, that's 42. So with framing and everything else, you might have to trim the mattress a little bit, but you can get very close.
Yeah.
Or
So yeah, I mean, depending on how you do it, you can do a custom made one, which might be a little better. Or they have stuff that you can actually get like on Wayfair. It's just a pull out sort of thing, but you just have to make sure and keep like 9 inches for the hardware so it can pivot. But should be doable and would actually be really cool if you did something like that.
Tyson, glass, not mobile tiny house. Would you be willing? They want you to build a house, Tyson. Okay, sorry. Sophie says, please, and I know she's asked this a few times, please, how deep, wide can you build out over the trailer tongue? Thank you. So pretty much as far as you can without hitting the crank, and also you don't want the truck bed to swing and hit it. Now you can extend that out, but most of the time, I think the most that we ever did was like 16 inches. So 16 inches finished. That's not inside measurement. So basically, you gain about 11 inches of space, but you have to account for when a truck that's square is turning, it becomes like triangles will poke into the side, and you'll crush your tailgate or your bumper. And I've seen it happen a lot because people kind of, everyone. It's funny. We want a tiny house, but we want as much of it as we can get. We want a tiny house, but we want it as tall, as wide, and as long as we can possibly get it. We want a tiny house, but we want to have as much stuff as we can. So, and that, listen, this is what every single client that I've ever worked with is like, okay, I have a grand piano from my grandmother that's very important to me, and it has to go in the house. And so it's just part of going tiny. But to answer your question, Sophie, I would say 16 inches is the max, but it very much depends on the trailer itself.
Yeah. We actually got ourselves into trouble trying to do something like this too. The other part not only is jackknifing on the truck, but it's also weight distribution too. So we built kind of a deck over for a tiny house one time, and it was too heavy on the front end. And so the way that the axle was placed, or the axles were placed, it sort of it put too much weight on the tongue end of things and not enough on the back, and so it wouldn't tow at all. So we actually ended up having to pour some concrete somewhere to kind of overcome for that, which is not a great solution, by the way. But you just want to make sure that you're taking all of those things into consideration. If you do build over the tongue, it's not the end of the world, but just make sure that you're thinking it through before you actually put the pedal to the metal, because it's one of those things that you can't really go back on. This is my daughter Merritt, by the way. She's out of nap time for some reason and needed Barbie shoe changing, so she picked the perfect half hour to make that happen, and she's leaving.
All right, I've got a question from ACJC, who's been asking this a bunch. I saw this at the beginning, and he or she is asking about schoolies or school buses. Tyson, do you have any experience at all with doing anything within a school bus?
No, I don't. That's something that we just would build new construction. I mean, we've seen a lot of schoolies at the tiny house festivals and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's really cool stuff people do with them. There's really average stuff people do with them. But personally, I don't have too much experience.
Same. Sorry, ACJC. I helped friends kind of lay out one, and I know they chopped the windows and welded the roof higher and then put in windows along. But other than that, like it's kind of like, I think, like a boat. There's so many curves and angles. It's going to be a lot of woodwork, a lot of time, and I would suggest finding communities that specialize in schoolies, because we're just we're not as talented, so we just make our own.
Yeah, although there's another question in here about rooftop decks, and I do know a great deal about rooftop decks.
Now we've got a minute and 9 left. Let's talk rooftop.
Yeah. So we have done a considerable amount of rooftop decks. It just makes too much sense, right? To double your square feet, if you can consider square feet being on the outside, which technically it's not, but practically, it makes a lot of sense. So we would do, of course, rails all the way around them, stairs or a ladder that goes up. There's some where you can access it from the inside. We did this one really cool one with a motorized sliding skylight. And so you just push a button, the skylight just opens up like a hatch. It just opens up, and then you pop through it onto your rooftop deck, which is really cool. And then, we've done some other ones with like grass on the top of them, which was really cool. And just some that were, meant for lounging, or some that were, more sort of maintenance type things. But we've had quite a bit of experience. But anyway, my point is, when you do it, make sure that your roof is really structural. You're going to want to not only make the spacing between the rafters and the joists a little bit smaller, but you're also going to want to make the wood a little bit bigger too, just to accommodate all of the extra weight. And then if you live in an area with snow, that's you have to really think about that too, because you don't want that snow to pile up. Typical, 2-3 roof span, or sorry, roof pitch is what you're looking for. But if you're in an area with lots of sun and want to do a rooftop deck to soak in the sun, that's a pretty stellar idea. But
Yeah.
anyway, we are out of time. But hey, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Actually, it's only the afternoon, huh? But thanks for joining us this afternoon, and enjoy the rest of the Global Tiny House Conference. Thank you to Jason and Zach for putting this
Yeah,
on. And
thank you.
Brian, it was so good to see you again. And thank you,
Always,
everybody. Enjoy the rest of
yeah.
your conference.
You guys enjoy. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you. We love the tiny house community, and it's really easy to do these from home now. So no traveling. Maybe we should do this more often.
Piece of cake, COVID proof.
Bye,
Bye, guys.